She was thrown out while pregnant with twins, betrayed by the man she loved and left with nothing. But 6 years later, Emily Carter returns, not in tears, but in a helicopter, with her children and a secret that will shake everything. This isn't just a comeback. It's a reckoning. Who is Emily, and what truth has she been hiding all these years? Tell us, where are you watching from? Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Emily Carter stood at the edge of her husband's office, her heart pounding with a strange mix of joy and dread. She held the small white envelope in her trembling hands, the one with the lab results. A baby. No, 2 babies. Twins. It should have been the happiest moment of her life. She had imagined this day so many times, Ryan lifting her into his arms, kissing her forehead, his strong arms wrapped around her as they both dreamed about names, nurseries, and a future filled with life. But something in the air told her this wouldn't be that kind of moment. Ryan Blake, founder and CEO of Blake Tech, didn't look up from his laptop when she stepped inside. His office, a sleek space full of polished surfaces and glass walls, felt unusually cold that morning. Emily cleared her throat. "Ryan," she said softly, "I have something to tell you." He finally looked up, and when his eyes met hers, something flickered. Irritation? Disinterest? Whatever it wasn't love. "I went to the doctor this morning," she continued, offering a tentative smile. "I'm pregnant." He blinked. "Pregnant?" She nodded. "With twins." There was a beat of silence so heavy it made the air hard to breathe. Ryan's expression didn't change. No widening eyes, no astonishment, no joy. He leaned back in his leather chair and folded his arms. "Are you sure they're mine?" The word struck her like a slap. She took a step back, as if her body instinctively needed to distance itself from the blow. "What, Ryan, what are you talking about?" He stood slowly, his 6'2" frame towering over her. "Don't play innocent, Emily. You think I don't notice the way you've been distant lately? Distracted?" She stared at him in disbelief. "Because I've been tired. I've been sick every morning. That's not being distant, Ryan. It's pregnancy." He shook his head, jaw tightening. "It's convenient, isn't it? Getting pregnant just when the prenup's about to expire." "You think I planned this?" Her voice cracked. "You think I tricked you into fatherhood?" His eyes were hard now, cold like marble. "I think you knew exactly what you were doing." At that moment, the door opened without a knock, and Margaret Blake walked in as if summoned by fury itself. Her blonde hair was as perfectly set as always, her tailored blazer hugging her thin frame like armor. She looked at Emily the way one might look at a piece of dirt on a silk blouse. "I told you, Ryan," Margaret said, her tone slick and poisonous. "I told you she'd do something like this. She wants your money. Always has." Emily turned to her, incredulous. "I have never wanted anything but him. I gave up my job, my family, my life back home to be with him. Don't stand there and pretend like you know me." Margaret smiled, but it was the kind of smile that sliced. "You gave up nothing. You got a mansion, a rich husband, and now you want the inheritance?" Ryan stepped between them. "That's enough." But he wasn't saying it to his mother. He looked at Emily again, and in that moment she realized he had already made his decision. His face was stone, unreadable, and devastatingly final. "I want you out," he said. "What?" she whispered. "You heard me. get your things, and leave. Ryan, no, I'm pregnant. I'm carrying your children. I don't believe you, he said flatly. And even if I did, I don't care. I don't want this. The coldness in his voice froze the breath in her lungs. Her knees weakened, but she didn't fall. She couldn't afford to. Margaret's smirk widened as she stepped closer. I'll have security escort you. Best not to make a scene. Emily opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked at Ryan, silently begging him to say something, anything that resembled the man she once loved. But he had already turned his back and returned to his desk. Moments later, 2 security guards appeared. She was ushered out of the office, her vision blurring from the tears she refused to let fall. Outside the gates of the Blake estate, rain began to fall in heavy sheets, soaking through her blouse and hair. She stood in the driveway, watching the massive iron gates close behind her like the final period at the end of a cruel sentence. Her luggage sat at her feet, her whole world reduced to 2 small suitcases and a heart full of agony. She walked, with no destination, no phone, no money, and 2 lives growing inside her. She wrapped her arms around her belly and whispered, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The night was unkind. The streets were wet and slick, and every car that passed splashed icy puddles against her legs. She found a bench under a bus stop shelter and sat down, trembling from cold and fear. How had everything unraveled so fast? Just a year ago, Ryan had held her hand on the beach in Cabo, whispering promises about forever. Just 6 months ago, he'd kissed her forehead every morning before leaving for work. When had it all changed? When had the love turned to suspicion? Was it ever really love at all? A car drove by, and the headlights caught her reflection in the bus stop glass. She looked nothing like the confident woman who once hosted charity galas and planned company events. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. Then, for the first time that night, she allowed herself to cry. Not soft tears, but raw, broken sobs that came from the core of her being. The kind of cry that empties you out. But when the sobs faded and the silence returned, something else settled in her chest. Resolve. No, she whispered. I won't let this destroy me. She pressed a hand gently against her belly. You're not mistakes. You're not accidents. You're miracles. The next morning, she woke to the distant sound of a door opening. The scent of fresh bread drifted from a building across the street, a small, family-run diner with a flickering neon sign, Green's Table. Driven by hunger and instinct, Emily pushed herself up and walked across the street. Her legs felt like lead. Her head throbbed. Inside, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a stained apron stood behind the counter. He looked up as she entered, took one glance at her, and frowned. You okay, miss? She hesitated. I just need a little food. I can pay you back, I promise. He studied her for a moment, then nodded toward a booth. Sit down. Eggs or pancakes? Her lip trembled. Both? He chuckled softly. Good choice. The warmth of the food filled her belly like salvation. She devoured every bite while the man watched from a distance. When she finished, she started to get up. Wait, he said. You got somewhere to go? She froze. He sighed. Didn't think so. I can work, she said quickly. I'll wash dishes, scrub floors, anything. He rubbed his jaw. You know how to cook? She blinked. Yes, a little. Then stay. Help me out around the kitchen. She stared at him, unsure whether to believe the kindness. "Why would you help a stranger?" The man smiled gently. "Name's Walter Green. This place was my late wife's dream." "She'd want me to help someone like you." Emily's throat tightened. "My name's Emily. Emily Carter." "Well, Emily Carter," Walter said, extending a hand. "Let's make some pancakes." And just like that, something changed. A thread of hope wove itself into the unraveling fabric of her life. It wasn't much, but it was something. Enough to stand up on. Enough to start over with. As she stood behind the counter later that day, washing plates and humming to herself while the twins shifted inside her, she allowed herself to smile. It was small, fragile, but it was real. The first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion, nausea, and survival. Emily Carter had gone from marble floors and designer handbags to scrubbing plates and mopping floors in a pair of shoes that were falling apart at the seams. The little room Walter offered her above the diner was small and drafty, with faded floral wallpaper and a creaky bed, but to Emily, it felt like a palace compared to the rain-soaked bench where she had slept that first night. It smelled like cinnamon and coffee in the mornings, and sometimes like fried onions late at night, and always, always, like a second chance. She woke each day before dawn to help Walter open the diner. Her hands blistered, her back ached, and the twins growing inside her seemed to suck up every ounce of strength she had left. But she didn't complain, not once, because for the first time in weeks she wasn't being looked at like a liar or a thief. She wasn't being judged, she was simply there, alive. And Walter never pried, never asked questions about her past. He only handed her a fresh apron every morning and taught her how to flip pancakes like a pro. "You've got a good hand for it," he told her one morning as she carefully turned a stack of blueberry flapjacks. "I used to cook a little," she admitted, "back when I still had a kitchen." "You've got the touch," he said, eyes twinkling, "and you've got heart. That matters more than any fancy culinary school." It was strange how quickly a routine formed. Wake up, prep dough, brew coffee, serve customers, collapse at night. And in between all of it, talk to the twins. She didn't know their names yet, didn't even know their genders, but she spoke to them like they were old friends. She told them stories. About her childhood, about how she once dreamed of owning a bakery, about the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs in Santa Barbara. She promised them things: warmth, safety, and love. So much love, it would drown out the memory of the man who'd denied them. Every time fear crept in, Emily would place her hand on her belly and breathe through it. "We're okay," she'd whisper. "I've got you, and you've got me." But nights were the hardest. After the diner closed, after Walter shuffled off to his own room next door with a tired sigh and a thermos of decaf, Emily would sit by the dusty window and stare down at the empty street. That was when the memories came. Ryan's voice, Margaret's accusations, the click of the door as it closed behind her. They played in her mind like a cruel movie on repeat. She hated herself for still missing him, but she hated him more for what he'd done, for how he'd looked at her with disgust, how quickly he'd thrown away everything they had built together, for how little it had taken for him to believe the worst of her. One night, around 2 a.m, she woke up clutching her stomach, pain shooting through her sides. For a moment, she thought she was losing them. Her heart pounded as she struggled to stand, calling out for help. Walter found her curled on the bathroom floor, pale and sweating. He didn't ask questions, just scooped her up in his arms, old man strength and all, and drove her to the nearest hospital, running every red light along the way. "They're okay," the doctor told her afterward. "It was a stress cramp. You need rest, less lifting, more sleep, and food, real food." Emily cried, not out of pain but relief. Walter sat beside her, holding her hand like a father might. "You scared the hell out of me, kid," he said gruffly. "Sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to. I just didn't want to be a burden." Walter leaned back in his chair. "Emily, listen to me. You're not a burden. You're a damn miracle. I saw you on that bench, soaked to the bone and still holding your head high. You think that kind of spirit's a burden? That's gold. That's grit." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. After that night, Walter stopped letting her work the early shifts. He hired a part-time dishwasher and made Emily stay in the front of the house, taking orders and pouring coffee. She started chatting with the regulars. A retired bus driver named Jim, who always asked for extra bacon, a single mom named Rosa who worked the night shift at the hospital and came in for a quiet breakfast at dawn, and a group of college kids who took over the corner booth every Saturday with loud laughter and waffle orders the size of mountains. They didn't know her story. They didn't ask. To them, she was just Emily, the quiet but kind waitress with the soft voice and tired eyes who always remembered their names and their favorite orders. And for a while, that was enough. Until one evening, about 5 months in, a man in a suit walked in. He was tall, with slicked-back hair and a sharp jawline that reminded her of Ryan. For a moment, her breath caught in her throat. But it wasn't him. Just a businessman stopping in for coffee and a slice of pie. Still, she realized something that night. She hadn't thought about Ryan in days. It shocked her, the absence of him. The fact that he was no longer the ghost haunting every room she entered. She wasn't sure when it happened, but somehow, day by day, pain had made room for purpose. Emily started keeping a notebook in her apron pocket. Every time she had an idea, a recipe, a flavor pairing, a potential name for a future cafe, she jotted it down. Lemon lavender scones, rosemary butter rolls, a kid's menu shaped like a storybook. She didn't know if she'd ever get the chance to build something of her own, but she wanted to be ready if the door ever opened. Then, one evening in early spring, Walter sat her down at the back booth. "I've been thinking," he said, pushing a cup of chamomile tea toward her. "That sounds dangerous," she joked, sipping the tea. "I'm serious. I'm getting too old for this. My knees ache. My hands don't work like they used to. It's time I stepped back." Emily blinked. "You're retiring?" "Sort of," he said. "I want you to run the place." She nearly dropped the mug. "What?" "You heard me. I'll still be around. But this place, it needs fresh eyes. Passion. Someone who gives a damn. That's you." "Walter, I can't. I'm—" She looked down at her belly, now visibly swollen. "I'm about to have 2 kids. I'm not qualified. I've never even—" "You've got more heart than any manager I ever hired, and you've learned fast. You think I don't see you scribbling ideas in that little notebook? You've got vision, and I trust you." Emily couldn't speak. Her throat tightened as her hands trembled around the warm mug. "Let me give you a real shot," he said gently. "Not a handout, a hand up." And just like that, the world shifted again. That night, Emily sat in her tiny room, her notebook open, her belly resting beneath her palms. Outside, the city hummed with life, and for the first time in what felt like forever, She didn't feel like a woman clinging to the edge of survival. She felt like someone building something, someone becoming. She reached for her pen and wrote 5 simple words on a blank page. Liam and Lily's table, coming soon. It was the beginning of something big. She just didn't know it yet. Emily's life took on a quiet rhythm in the months that followed Walter's offer. The weight of responsibility felt enormous, but not crushing. In fact, for the first time in a long while, she felt something blooming beneath the exhaustion and swollen ankles. Purpose. Every morning, she opened the diner with Walter, now working fewer shifts but always present, always watching with a fatherly kind of pride. Together, they reviewed inventory, adjusted menus, and even repainted the front sign. Green's Table, managed by Emily Carter. The words felt surreal to see in print. She'd taken over more than just the operations. She was making the place hers, slowly but surely. She added warm lights and fresh flowers on the tables. She introduced a small pastry shelf filled with homemade scones and hand-piped cupcakes, which sold out almost every day. People began to ask for her by name. But as the diner thrived, her pregnancy marched forward with just as much momentum. At 7 months, she waddled more than walked. Her back ached constantly. Her cravings were out of control. One day it was blueberry waffles at 3 a.m. The next, it was an intense need for dill pickles dipped in peanut butter. Walter tried not to look horrified. Despite the discomfort, Emily glowed in a way she hadn't in years. Customers often complimented her on how radiant she looked, but behind her smile there were moments of quiet terror. She was going to be a mother. Alone, with 2 babies. No instruction manual, no real support system, no nursery painted in soft pastel colors, just a tiny 1-bedroom space above a diner and a dream scribbled in a notebook. But she didn't let the fear win. Instead, she channeled it into planning. Diapers, formula, crib measurements, budget spreadsheets, lullaby playlists. She researched everything from natural birth methods to sleep training techniques. When she wasn't working or collapsed in bed with swollen feet propped up on a pillow, she was planning. Then, one night, just after closing, a sudden sharp pain struck her low in her abdomen. She dropped the coffee pot she was rinsing, gripping the edge of the sink to keep from falling. Walter heard the crash and came rushing in. "Emily?" She couldn't speak. The pain tightened around her like a vice. He didn't hesitate. In seconds, he had his coat wrapped around her and his keys in hand. "Let's go." The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and bleach. The lights were far too bright, and the beeping machines around her made it impossible to relax. Emily lay on the stiff bed, clutching the sheets, breathing through the waves of pain. It wasn't time, not yet. She was only 32 weeks. Her heart raced. A nurse adjusted her IV. "You're in preterm labor, but we're going to try and stop it. Just breathe. You're doing great." She didn't feel like she was doing great. She felt like the universe had decided to see how much more she could take. She wanted to scream, but instead she closed her eyes and whispered to the babies, "Please stay, just a little longer." By morning, the contractions had stopped, but the doctor made it clear she would need to rest. No heavy lifting, no stress, and definitely no managing a diner full-time. Walter took her hand after the doctor left. "The diner will be fine. You've done more than enough. It's time to focus on you and those babies." "I don't know how to stop," she whispered. "Then let me help you." For the next few weeks, Emily stayed in the hospital for observation. Walter visited every day, always bringing food from the diner and bad jokes. The nurses adored him. So did Emily. One rainy morning, as thunder rolled through the city, Emily woke with a strange stillness in her chest. It was too quiet, too calm. She placed a hand on her belly and didn't feel movement. She waited. 10 seconds, 30, nothing. Panic slammed into her like a truck. "Something's wrong," she gasped, hitting the call button. Nurses swarmed in, monitors were wheeled over, gel was smeared across her abdomen. And then, the one thing. There is one. Kala. There is one. Here. There is one thing. There. Here. She burst into tears. The nurse squeezed her hand. "They're fine. They're just sleepy today." That night, she lay awake, hand resting on her stomach, whispering promises into the darkness. "I'll never let anything happen to you. I don't care what it takes. I'll fight every day to make this world safe for you." 2 weeks later, at exactly 35 weeks, her water broke. There was no slow build-up, no dramatic countdown. It was sudden, chaotic, and terrifying. She was eating soup when it happened, and the bowl shattered on the floor as she scrambled to press the nurse call button. It all happened in a blur. Nurses, stretchers, blinding lights, a cold delivery room. Emily barely had time to process any of it before the contractions hit, hard and fast. "Ready?" the doctor asked. "No," she panted, gripping the sides of the bed. "But let's do this anyway." It was pain like she'd never imagined. Sweat poured down her face, her screams filled the room. And then, the cry of a baby. One, and then another. Two. A nurse placed a tiny wrinkled baby girl on her chest. Moments later, a slightly larger baby boy joined her. Emily stared at them in disbelief, in awe. Lily and Liam. She hadn't even known their names until that moment, but the second she saw them, she knew. Their eyes were closed, but their little mouths moved as if searching for comfort. She pulled them close, feeling their warmth, their breath, their very existence. "You made it," she whispered. "We made it." They were small, so small, but strong, fighters, just like her. Lily had a head full of dark hair and the tiniest dimple in her chin. Liam had her nose, her cheeks, but something about the way his tiny fingers curled around hers reminded her, painfully, of Ryan. She pushed the thought aside. This moment was not about him. It was about them. The hospital kept the twins in the NICU for observation, but the doctors were optimistic. They were breathing well, feeding, and doing better than most preemies. Emily spent every waking moment by their incubators, reading to them, singing softly, resting her fingers on their tiny bodies, just to remind them she was there. Walter visited every day, too. He brought flowers and clothes and a plush stuffed elephant that was too big for their bassinets, but would grow into a treasured keepsake. "You're not alone," he told her one evening, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've got people who care." It nearly broke her. The idea that after everything, someone still meant it when they said they wouldn't leave. When the twins were finally discharged, Emily carried them out of the hospital in 2 car seats with hand-kit blankets wrapped tightly around them. She sat in the back seat of Walter's car, watching the city lights pass by, and realized she was heading home. Not to a mansion, not to marble countertops or silk sheets, but to something real, something earned. That night, in the tiny bedroom above the diner, Emily laid her babies in a makeshift crib she had crafted out of dresser drawers lined with blankets. She sat beside them and cried, not out of sadness, not out of fear, but because this was the start of everything. She was no longer the woman who had been kicked out in the rain, no longer the wife begging to be believed. She was a mother, and she had just taken her first step into a brand new life. The weeks following Liam and Lily's homecoming were a beautiful chaos. Emily barely slept. Between feedings, diaper changes, and keeping the twins calm, she often found herself standing in the middle of the small room with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by exhaustion and love in equal measure. But even on the worst nights, when the babies took turns crying, when she hadn't showered in days, when her body ached from carrying two lives and now caring for them, she never once thought about giving up. There was something sacred about those quiet 3 a.m. moments when she held both of them close, one resting on each shoulder, their soft breaths warming her neck. In those moments, her mind would wander to the past, to the rainy night she had been pushed out of Ryan's mansion, to the cold sidewalk beneath her shoes, to the trembling hands wrapped protectively around her belly. She had come so far, and yet the road ahead felt endless. But Emily was no longer surviving. When the twins turned 6 months old, Walter surprised her with a cake shaped like a bottle and 2 tiny party hats. She laughed until her ribs hurt watching Liam tug Lily's hat off and stuff it in his mouth. "You've got good kids," Walter said, sipping his coffee. "They've got your fight in 'em." "They saved me," she replied, watching them with a soft gaze. "I thought I was done, and then there they were. Maybe now it's time to do something for yourself." Emily looked at him, brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean this diner's doing well, better than it's done in years. And that's you. Your ideas, your energy, your heart. You ever think about what might come next?" She smiled faintly. "All the time. I just don't know if it's possible." "Then maybe you need to stop thinking and start trying." Those words lit a fire inside her. That night, when the twins were finally asleep, Emily pulled out her worn notebook. The cover was torn at the edges, smudged with fingerprints and coffee stains. Inside, the pages were bursting with dreams, sketches of a future she hadn't yet dared to believe in. She flipped through menus, marketing ideas, recipes, floor plans for a future space where families could gather and feel at home. A place where food told a story, a place that felt like her. She circled 3 words she'd written months ago: Lily and Liam's table. That would be the name. First move was applying for a small business loan. It terrified her. She had no family backing, no prestigious business school on her resume. Just grit, a well-run diner under her belt, and a vision. But Emily had learned something crucial in the fire of her hardship. People respect honesty, passion, and results. When she presented her proposal to the bank, the loan officer, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a warm smile, asked, "Why name the place after your kids?" Emily answered without hesitation, "Because they're the reason I'm here, and I want to build a future with their names written all over it." The loan was approved. She cried in her car, gripping the papers to her chest as if they might fly away. For the first time, since her world had collapsed, the universe had said, yes. From there, everything moved quickly. Walter helped her find a small storefront just 5 blocks from the diner. It had been a bookstore once, with exposed brick and big windows that let the sunlight pour in during the mornings. It needed work, desperately, but Emily saw beauty in the bones. She worked tirelessly, balancing renovations with raising her twins. Contractors were hired. Friends from the diner volunteered to help paint. Rosa, the single mom nurse, designed the logo for free. A heart made of a spoon and fork, with 2 little stars above them. Liam and Lily. Emily poured every ounce of herself into that space. She wanted it to be more than just a restaurant. She wanted it to feel like walking into someone's kitchen, comfortable, familiar, full of soul. The grand opening was modest. No celebrities, no red carpets. Just the local community hungry for more than food. They were hungry for her story, for her spirit, for the way she made them feel welcome and seen. The line wrapped around the block. She greeted every customer with a smile and often a baby on her hip. Lily had taken a liking to the smell of cinnamon and always reached toward the pastries, while Liam, more serious, liked to sit at the counter and stare at the mixing bowls like they held the secrets of the universe. Within 3 months, Lily and Liam's table was the talk of the neighborhood. Food bloggers began writing about it. A viral TikTok review brought in tourists, and when a major food magazine featured Emily as a rising star of small business cuisine, her phone didn't stop ringing for days. But none of that compared to the way people talked about the atmosphere. The warmth, the kindness, the sense that this was more than a business. It was a home. And Emily, she had never felt more powerful. One night as she was closing up, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "I guess it's true what they say. The best revenge is success." She turned around. Walter leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her with that same twinkle he'd had the day they met. "You really did it." She walked over and hugged him tightly. "We did it." "No, Emily, you did it. I just made pancakes and told bad jokes." They laughed, but then fell into a comfortable silence, the kind shared between 2 people who had weathered storms together. She looked around the restaurant, the twinkling lights, the chalkboard menu with the day's specials, the framed baby photos of Liam and Lily that adorned one wall. "I want more," she said suddenly. Walter raised an eyebrow. "More? Another location, a bakery maybe. I've got ideas, so many ideas." He chuckled. "Well, don't let me hold you back." Emily paused. "You never have. You were the only one who didn't." Walter's eyes misted slightly, but he blinked it away and nodded. "Then it's settled. You go build your empire. I'll keep the home base warm." Over the next year, Emily did exactly that. With the profits from the first restaurant and another approved loan, she opened a second location in a neighboring town, this one featuring a play area for kids and a breakfast for dinner menu that became a local sensation. Then came the third location, an upscale version in the city, where she tested gourmet versions of her diner classics. It was riskier, trendier, but it worked. Because people didn't just come for the food, they came for the story. She was featured in business journals, invited to speak on women's entrepreneurship panels, and even interviewed on local TV. But no matter how high she climbed, Emily never forgot who she was. She still tucked Liam and Lily in every night, reading them bedtime stories about courage and kindness. She still dropped by Green's table once a week, where Walter insisted she sit down and eat like a normal person. And every time someone asked her what drove her, she would answer the same way. 2 tiny reasons, and the promise I made them. On the twins' third birthday, Emily threw a block party outside the original Lily and Liam's table. There were balloons, face painting, a petting zoo, and enough cupcakes to feed an army. She stood in the middle of it all, holding a cupcake in one hand and her kids in the other, watching as the community she had helped build celebrated not just them, but her journey. Someone asked her, "What's next?" She looked out at the crowd, then down at her children. "I'm not sure," she said, smiling, "but whatever it is, I'm ready." She had come from nothing, been thrown away like she didn't matter, and now she stood on the shoulders of everything she had built. Her name no longer whispered in pity or scandal. It was spoken with admiration. Emily Carter, mother, businesswoman, survivor. And this was only the beginning. The city skyline shimmered in the dusk as Emily stood at the window of her downtown apartment, her reflection caught between the glass and the fading gold of sunset. Below her, cars snaked through the streets in a slow-moving river of red taillights, and the sound of distant sirens hummed beneath the city's steady rhythm. In the next room, Liam and Lily giggled as they colored on the floor, their markers scattering like tiny explosions of joy across the hardwood. They were 6 now, curious, mischievous, fiercely bonded, and they were her everything. She watched them for a moment, marveling at how much they'd grown. Lily had her fiery spirit, her wild imagination, and the kind of questions that made grown men sweat. Liam was quieter, more watchful, but there was a spark in him that reminded her of the little boy who'd once gripped her finger in the NICU and refused to let go. Emily had built a life that many only dreamed of. 3 restaurants, each with their own identity, their own loyal clientele. She was now a name in the culinary world, not just for her food, but for her story. Her face had graced magazine covers, her journey shared in podcasts and profiles, but nothing, not the accolades, not the fame, mattered more than the 2 little lives she'd fought so hard to protect. Still, despite all she had accomplished, a quiet ache lingered in the back of her mind. Not regret, never that, but something unfinished, something unresolved. She hadn't spoken to Ryan Blake since the day he cast her out. She never answered the letters that had come in the early years, carefully worded messages from his lawyers, vague inquiries cloaked in concern, and after a while the letters had stopped altogether. She assumed Margaret had made sure of that. But now, everything had changed. She walked back to the kitchen table, where a copy of the city's business journal lay open. On the front page, just beneath a bold headline about tech expansion, was a familiar name. Ryan Blake to host Global Innovation Summit in hometown. Emily stared at the article, her pulse steady but cold. 6 years. 6 years without a word, 6 years of silence while she rebuilt her life from ash and rubble. And now he was returning, triumphantly, arrogantly, just as she had always known he would. He was planning a high-profile event in the very city he had driven her out of, no doubt expecting nothing had changed, that the girl he had tossed aside would still be gone. But she wasn't forgotten. She had become unforgettable. And she knew, as surely as she had known her twins' names the moment they were born, that it was time. Time for the truth to be seen. Time for her children to understand where they came from, and for Ryan to see what he had walked away from. Not out of vengeance. Emily had long since let go of hate. But closure was different. Closure was necessary. She closed the magazine and picked up her phone. Her team had been asking for weeks if she wanted to do something big for the grand opening of her newest restaurant, a flagship location just blocks from the convention center where the summit would be held. She'd said no at the time, preferring something simple, quiet. But now, she smiled, a slow, steady thing that reached her eyes. Now was the time to be heard. The next day, announcements were sent to every major local outlet. A press release, carefully crafted, stated that Emily Carter, founder of Lily and Liam's Table, would be opening her most exclusive restaurant yet, right in the heart of the city. It promised an event unlike any other, with a guest list filled with names from the culinary, tech, and media industries. The opening night would be public, but private enough to feel elite. Strategic invitations were sent to journalists, influencers, and, yes, to certain tech executives with a personal connection to the city. Emily didn't sign the invitations herself. She didn't need to. The name alone was enough. Her staff, loyal to the core, threw themselves into the planning. A rooftop garden dining space was finished just in time. Custom uniforms were ordered. Menu cards were printed on recycled linen paper. Every detail spoke of elegance, of growth, of reinvention. Liam and Lily watched the preparations with wide eyes. "Are we gonna be there too?" Lily asked one evening, swinging her legs off the kitchen stool. "Of course," Emily said, smiling. "This place is named for you. You're the reason it all exists." Liam tilted his head. "Will the man from the picture be there?" Emily froze. "What picture?" she asked gently. "The one in the box," Liam said. "In your closet. The one where you're standing next to a man with black hair and a funny smile." She felt her breath hitch. She hadn't realized they'd seen it. That old photograph, the last one taken before her world fell apart, had been tucked into a memory box she never opened. But, of course, kids always found the things we least wanted them to. "That man," Lily asked, "was he our daddy?" Emily sat down slowly, pulling them close. "Yes," she said softly. "His name is Ryan. Do we get to meet him?" "I don't know," she said. "Would you want to?" Lily looked at her brother. Liam shrugged. "I guess, if he's nice." Emily kissed the tops of their heads. "Well, we'll find out." The night of the opening arrived with fanfare and flashbulbs. The restaurant sparkled under soft amber lighting, the rooftop garden blooming with flowers and fairy lights. Servers moved like clockwork. The kitchen ran with military precision. Emily stood near the entrance, in an emerald green dress that hugged her figure and made her feel strong, grounded. She wasn't just the girl who had been abandoned. She was the woman who had risen from it. Liam and Lily stood beside her, dressed in matching navy outfits, their hair brushed and faces bright with excitement. The guests arrived in waves: chefs, writers, critics, celebrities. The press snapped photos. Everyone wanted to meet the woman behind the name. And then, just as the speeches were about to begin, the final car pulled up. Ryan Blake stepped out. He looked older, sharper around the eyes, his once boyish face now carved with the lines of time and ambition. But Emily recognized him instantly, and by the way his breath caught when he saw her, she knew he recognized her to 22-0. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he approached. "Emily," he said, voice low. "You look different," she offered with a cool smile. He gave a shaky laugh. "No, just strong? I always was," she said. He looked down at the two children holding her hands. His breath caught again. Their eyes, their expressions, there was no mistaking it. "These are your children," Emily said. The words hung in the air like a final note in a symphony. Ryan dropped to one knee without thinking, eye level with them. He looked overwhelmed, lost, like a man waking up from a very long sleep. "Hi," he said to them. I don't even know what to say." Liam tilted his head. "You're our dad?" "Yes," Ryan choked out. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "Why didn't you stay?" Lily asked, her voice small. Ryan looked up at Emily, the question echoing like a cannon blast in his ears. "I made a mistake," he said, barely above a whisper. "A terrible one, and I've lived with it every day since." Silence. Then Lily reached out and touched his face. "You look sad," she said. "I am," he replied. Emily stepped forward, placing a hand on Liam's shoulder. "They don't need a perfect father," she said, voice steady, "but they do deserve the truth." "I want to know them," Ryan said. "I want to be part of their lives, if you'll let me." Emily studied him for a long moment. "You can't undo the past," she said, "but maybe you can earn a place in their future." Ryan looked at the children, then back at her. "I'd do anything." "Then start with being here," she said. "Show up. Show them you mean it." He nodded, emotion thick in his throat. Emily turned back to the crowd, lifting a glass of champagne. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said. "This isn't just an opening. It's a homecoming, a reminder that no matter how far we fall, there's always a way to rise." Applause thundered around her, but as the cameras flashed and music swelled, all she could feel were the small, steady hands of her children in hers, and the quiet, powerful beginning of something she never thought possible. Reconciliation, on her terms. The sun rose slowly over the city skyline, gilding the glass towers with warm, golden light. It was the morning after the opening night of Lily and Liam's table, and the city was buzzing. Social media had exploded overnight with videos of the ribbon cutting, snapshots of the rooftop garden, and clips of Emily Carter's powerful closing speech. News outlets ran headlines like, "From rock bottom to culinary royalty, Emily Carter's triumphant return," and "Mother, mogul, icon." The energy was electric, and it radiated across every inch of the city. But while the rest of the world saw glamour and grace, Emily Carter was pacing her apartment floor with a nervous energy she hadn't felt in years. Liam and Lily were still asleep in the next room, curled up in their beds, unaware that their lives had shifted again overnight. Last night had not only marked the opening of her most personal and ambitious venture yet, it had marked the return of a ghost she had long since buried. Ryan, the man who had once promised her forever. The man who had shattered her world in a single breath. And now, 6 years later, the man who had looked into the eyes of his children for the first time and realized he had missed everything. Emily could still see his face, the confusion, the regret, the barely contained emotion. And yet, what haunted her most wasn't his guilt. It was how familiar he still felt, even after everything. How some part of her remembered the man she used to love. But this wasn't about her anymore. This was about Liam and Lily. They had questions, and Ryan had answers to give. By noon, her team had gathered at the flagship restaurant for a debrief. The staff was beaming, riding the high of a successful launch. The phones were ringing off the hook. Reservations were booked out for the next 2 months. As her assistant rattled off numbers and social media stats, Emily nodded absently, her thoughts miles away. A soft knock pulled her from the meeting. It was the receptionist. "There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says you'll want to speak with him." She didn't have to ask who. Ryan stood in the front of the restaurant wearing a dark gray jacket and jeans, a rare vulnerability in his posture. He looked unsure for once, like a man stepping into someone else's kingdom. "I won't take much of your time," he said when she approached. She didn't smile. "Let's talk upstairs." They sat in her private office, a small space lined with photos of her children and shelves of cookbooks dog-eared with love. The hum of the city seemed quieter up here, as if this conversation deserved its own sacred silence. Ryan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't even know where to begin." "Start with the truth," Emily said simply. He nodded slowly. "That day, when you told me you were pregnant, I panicked. I wasn't ready to be a father, and my mother, she was in my ear constantly. She made me believe things I should have never doubted." Emily raised an eyebrow. "You didn't just doubt me, Ryan. You threw me out. Pregnant. I know," he said, voice cracking, "and I have no excuse. I've thought about that moment every single day for 6 years, and not just because of what I did to you, but because I lost them. Them, Emily." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph, one she recognized instantly. It was from the gala they had attended a week before she told him she was pregnant, back when she still believed love was enough. He handed it to her carefully. "I kept it," he said, "even when I tried to pretend I hadn't made the biggest mistake of my life." Emily took the photo and set it down between them. "And now, I want to fix what I can," he said. "I want to be a part of their lives. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need them to know who I am, and I need them to know I didn't forget about them." She studied him for a long moment. "They're not just names or symbols of guilt, Ryan. They're people. People I've raised, protected, and loved every single day since the moment they took their first breaths. I know that," he said, "and I don't want to take anything away from you. I just want to try." Emily stood and walked to the window. The restaurant below buzzed with life. Customers laughed, servers moved with grace, and somewhere in that hum was the sound of her future, still building itself. "I'll talk to them," she said finally. "I'll tell them what you've said, and if they're open to it, you can come by. But this isn't about you or me. It's about what's best for them." Ryan nodded, standing too. "That's all I asked." He paused at the door. "Emily, thank you." She didn't answer. She watched him leave, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. She had expected fury, or indifference, but instead she felt the weight of something deeper. The truth. That some scars didn't disappear, but they could fade, and maybe that was enough. That evening, after dinner and bedtime stories, she sat with Liam and Lily on the living room floor. They were drawing again. Lily's page full of hearts and rainbows, Liam's covered in strange, intricate mazes. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. They looked up, sensing something serious. "You remember the man from last night?" she said. "The one who came to the restaurant?" They both nodded. "That man is your father. His name is Ryan. He made some really big mistakes before you were born. But he's come back now. He wants to meet you, to know you." Liam tilted his head. "Is he going to live with us?" Emily smiled gently. "No, sweetie. This isn't about changing anything. This is just about you having the chance to know who he is, if you want to." There was a long pause. Then Lily said, "Can he draw with us next time?" Emily laughed softly, her eyes misting. "I think he'd like that very much." The next week, Ryan visited again. This time there was no awkward introduction, just 4 people sitting on the floor, surrounded by crayons and snacks. He listened as Lily told a long, winding story about a dragon who opened a cupcake shop. He helped Liam finish a puzzle. He laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in years. And Emily watched, a quiet presence on the edge of the room, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. After the twins went to bed, Ryan lingered at the door. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You don't have to," she replied. "Just be here. That's enough." He nodded and left, and, for the first time in a long time, Emily felt the past begin to loosen its grip. The headlines would keep coming, her business would keep growing, but this quiet reconnection, this return to something human, was the part of the story no one would ever see. And that made it all the more real. The city buzzed with whispers. It had been 3 weeks since the night of the opening, 3 weeks since Ryan Blake re-entered the orbit of the woman and children he had once abandoned. The tabloids had their version: runaway husband seeks redemption with mogul mom Emily Carter. Social media thrived on the speculation, with debates raging about whether he deserved a second chance. But inside Emily's world, none of that mattered. She wasn't concerned with public perception. She was focused on her children, and on what the truth would cost them now. At first, Ryan's visits were tentative, cautious. He would stop by in the afternoons, bearing gifts that Emily promptly asked him to stop bringing. Liam and Lily didn't need to be bought. What they needed was presence, sincerity, and time. To his credit, Ryan listened. He came without fanfare, no entourage, no flashy gestures. He sat on the floor, coloring dragons and solving puzzles, slowly earning pieces of their trust. Liam warmed to him faster. The boy had always been curious, introspective, prone to observing before reacting. One afternoon, Emily caught them sitting by the window, heads bent over a book, as Ryan explained how clouds formed. Liam's eyes were wide with wonder. Lily, on the other hand, kept him at arm's length. Her questions were direct and piercing. And Ryan, to his credit, never flinched. "Why didn't you come to my birthday party?" she asked one day, swinging her legs over the edge of the couch. "I didn't know about it," Ryan answered honestly. "Why didn't you ask?" "I didn't think I deserved to." Lily nodded slowly. "Okay, you can come to the next one, but you have to bring balloons, and not the boring kind." Ryan smiled, a little choked up. "Deal." Emily watched all of it from a distance, her heart treading the fine line between guarded and hopeful. The children were adjusting. The damage wasn't undone, but it was healing. And yet, something gnawed at the edge of her mind, because she hadn't told him everything. Not yet. Not the final truth that could change everything all over again. One crisp morning, while the twins were at school and the restaurant was running smoothly under her staff's capable hands, Emily received a delivery. A manila envelope, hand-dressed, with no return label. She didn't need one. She knew exactly what it was. The original deed. The one Walter had given her years ago, after her first restaurant had taken off. The paperwork showing full transfer of ownership, not just of the original Greens table, but of a holding company that owned several city properties. One of those properties, as it happened, was the very building housing Blake Tech's regional headquarters. And the name on the owner's line? Emily Carter. What Ryan, and more importantly what Margaret, had never known was that Ryan's late father had grown fond of Emily during her early years of marriage. He had seen in her the strength, the drive, the kindness that Margaret had refused to acknowledge. And before his unexpected death, he had quietly transferred several assets to Emily's name, including an interest in the company his son would one day inherit. At the time, Emily had thought it symbolic, nothing more than an elderly man's way of expressing confidence in her character. She never realized how much power it gave her. Not until now. She held the envelope in her lap, fingers trembling. Her reflection stared back from the window, older, wiser, but still weighed down by the burden of decisions no one else could make for her. Was it time? Was he ready? That evening, after Ryan had finished playing with the kids, Emily asked him to stay for coffee. They sat in her kitchen, the air thick with unspoken words. "I need to tell you something," she began. Ryan's face tensed immediately. "Okay." She placed the envelope on the table between them. He looked at it, then at her, brows furrowing. "What is it?" "Proof," she said simply, "of something you probably thought you controlled." He opened the envelope slowly, drawing out the papers. His eyes scanned the contents, growing wider with every line. When he reached the signature, his father's name etched beneath hers, his face drained of color. "No," he whispered. This isn't possible." "It is," Emily said softly. "Your father gave it to me. Before he passed, he wanted me to have something of my own." Ryan pushed back from the table, standing too quickly. The chair clattered behind him. "You own the building?" he asked, voice raw. "The company I've worked my whole life to protect. You—" "I haven't touched it," she said quickly. "I've never interfered, never taken a dime from it. I didn't want revenge, Ryan. I wanted freedom." He walked to the window, gripping the frame like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "My mother, she doesn't know." "No," Emily said, "but she will. Soon." Ryan turned to face her. "Why now?" "Because the truth always comes out," she replied. "I didn't build my life to throw it in your face. I built it because you left me with nothing but 2 babies and a promise. But I'm tired of carrying all the truths. You deserve to know, even if it shakes everything." He came back to the table, sitting slowly, the documents still in his hands. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. "Unless I have to. I want peace, Ryan, not war. I have no intention of stripping anything from you or humiliating your family, but I will protect what's mine, and I will protect our children." For a long time, he said nothing, just stared at the paper that proved the ground he'd walked on for years hadn't belonged to him. Then, softly, he said, "I believe you." Emily blinked. "What?" "I believe you," he repeated. For the first time, fully, completely. "I was wrong 6 years ago. And I'm not going to be wrong again." He slid the papers back into the envelope and handed it to her. "This is yours. It always was." The following week, Emily received a call from a business columnist. "Word is, you own the building Blake Tech operates from. Is it true?" She paused for a beat. "I don't comment on private holdings," she said smoothly. "But I believe in quiet power and earned peace." The article ran with the headline, "The Woman Behind the Empire. Emily Carter's Silent Ownership of Blake Tech Revealed." Margaret Blake exploded. Of course she did. She called Ryan livid and venomous, accusing Emily of manipulation, of deceit, of trying to dismantle their legacy. Ryan listened for a moment, then said, "You taught me how to protect myself. Emily taught me how to love something enough to let go." He hung up. Later that day, he showed up at Emily's office with a proposal. Not a business one, a personal one. A co-parenting plan. Equal time, equal love. No courts, no demands, just presence, support, and shared responsibility. Emily read the paper, her throat tightening. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't want to lose this chance," he said. "Not again." They signed it together, side by side. That night, as she tucked Liam and Lily into bed, Emily felt something lift off her chest. The weight of fear, of resentment, of carrying it all alone. The twins looked up at her, smiling sleepily. "Did Daddy really used to live in a castle?" Lily asked. Emily chuckled. "Something like that." "Do you think he's scared of you now?" Liam asked innocently. Emily paused, then smiled. "Not scared," she said. "Just finally awake." Downstairs, Ryan stood in the doorway, watching quietly as she kissed the twins goodnight. He met her eyes one last time before leaving. And in that look, without saying a word, he told her, "I see you now." And she believed him. Emily Carter stood in the quiet of her rooftop garden, the same place where it had all begun. The string lights above glowed like captured stars, casting a soft golden hue over the evening crowd below. The restaurant buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, the kind of background melody she had once only dreamed about when rocking her newborns to sleep in a tiny room above a diner. Now, years later, she had built everything she promised them, and more. But tonight, the air felt heavier. Not tense, exactly, just full. Something was coming. Inside the restaurant, her twins, Liam and Lily, now nearly 7, were seated at a private table with Ryan. Their giggles floated up to the rooftop like music, and Emily felt her chest swell with something sharp and soft at the same time. Watching them together had become less strange, less surreal over the past few months. Ryan had shown up, again and again, proving his intent with time and tenderness. He had been patient, respectful, and deeply remorseful. But Emily had not forgotten the years he had missed, and she knew she never would. Yet forgiveness, she'd learned, wasn't about forgetting. It was about choosing peace, choosing growth, and in many ways, choosing herself. She descended the staircase quietly, her heels clicking softly on the wooden steps. Just before she reached the bottom, her phone buzzed. A text from Walter. "Proud of you, kid, watching from a booth in the back. The best stories always come full circle." She smiled. He always knew just when to reach out. Back at the table, Ryan was attempting to balance a spoon on his nose while the twins howled with laughter. It was ridiculous and awkward and beautiful. He caught sight of Emily and quickly stood, clearing his throat with a sheepish grin. "You're late," Lily teased. "I was upstairs, making a wish," Emily said. "Did it come true?" Liam asked. "I think it's about to." She looked at Ryan then. He offered a small nod, his eyes searching hers. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. Emily motioned to the outdoor patio. The twins returned to their dessert. Lily with her chocolate mousse, Liam with his signature banana tart. As they walked side by side into the cool night air, Ryan seemed different, grounded, nervous. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, "about where we've been and where we could go." Emily said nothing, letting the weight of the moment settle naturally. "You've built a life most people only dream of," he continued. You've done it with grace and strength and a hell of a lot of brilliance. I see it now. Everything you were capable of. Everything I couldn't see before." She raised an eyebrow. "Is this leading somewhere?" He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Not a contract, not a legal document. A letter. She took it carefully, unfolding the page. It was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged in places. He'd written it with intention, maybe even tears. She read in silence. "Emily, if I had seen you clearly back then, maybe I wouldn't have lost everything. But losing everything was the only way I could finally become the man I should have been. I've watched you turn pain into power, heartbreak into home, and I know now that love isn't loud. It's consistent. It's quiet mornings and hard choices, and showing up even when it's hard. I want to do that for Liam, for Lily, and if you'll let me, for you." She looked up, slowly folding the letter. "You want something more?" she said, not as a question. "I want a second chance," Ryan said. "Not to undo the past, but to build something new." Emily sighed, her breath visible in the cool night air. She leaned back against the patio railing, letting the silence stretch. "I don't know if I can love you the same way I did," she admitted. "I'm not asking for the same love," he said. "I'm asking for a chance to earn the kind that grows with time. The kind that begins here, not back then." She looked out over the city, the place that had witnessed her fall and rise, her despair and triumph. "I've learned how to live without you," she said. "That was the hardest part." "I know," he said gently. "I can't unlearn that." "I wouldn't want you to," Ryan replied. "But maybe now you can learn how to live with me again. On your terms. With no illusions. Just possibility." She turned to him, her heart thudding. There had been a time when his face held nothing but pain for her, but now she saw something else. Humility, hope, change. Before she could respond, a soft voice called from behind them. "Mom?" They both turned to see Liam and Lily standing in the doorway. Lily held a drawing in her hands. A simple sketch of 4 stick figures standing in front of a building that looked suspiciously like their restaurant. "This is our family," Lily said. "We made it together." Ryan crouched to take the paper, his hands trembling. He looked at Emily, who was already blinking back tears. "Looks like they've made their decision," she said. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the restaurant lights had dimmed, Emily sat alone in her office. She stared at the letter again, then at a framed photo of the twins taken during their 5th birthday party. She remembered how they'd smiled, with cake on their cheeks and candles in their eyes. She had given them the world, she'd done it on her own, and now the world was offering her something back. Not perfection, not fairy tales, but something real. A knock sounded on the door. Ryan stepped in, holding 2 cups of tea. "Couldn't sleep either?" She gestured for him to sit. "You always made terrible tea." He smiled. "Still do." They sat together in the quiet, sipping, saying nothing for a while. There was no rush now. No pressure. Just a stillness that felt earned. "What now?" Ryan asked eventually. Emily leaned back in her chair, eyes tired but clear. "Now, we take it one step at a time. For them, for us. We move forward, but we never forget where we've been." He nodded. She looked at him and said the words she hadn't expected to ever say again. "Welcome home." He didn't cry. Not then. But later, when he returned to his hotel and looked again at the drawing Lily had given him, he did. Because he knew what he had been given wasn't just forgiveness. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. A second chance, a rebuilt family, and a future made not from repair, but from resilience. Emily Carter had once been left in the rain, discarded, humiliated, and pregnant. Now she stood tall as a woman who had crafted an empire from pain, who had chosen love without losing herself, who had faced the past not with bitterness, but with brilliance. The world would remember her name, not because of scandal or drama or headlines, but because she proved without a doubt that the truth always rises, and so did she. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. We know life is busy, and the fact that you're still here means the world to us. Emily's journey reminds us of one of life's most powerful truths. No matter how deep the betrayal, how heavy the loss, or how impossible the odds, strength, resilience, and love can rebuild what was once broken. Sometimes the most painful endings lead to the most beautiful beginnings. So, what about you? Where are you watching from? We'd love to know your city, your country. Drop it in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or simply reminded you that second chances do exist, please consider subscribing to our channel. We post powerful, emotional stories every week that are sure to move and uplift you. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, and become part of our storytelling family. Because your next favorite story might be just one click away. See you in the next video.